Lawyers of Reddit, what was the best gotcha moment you ever experienced? I acted for a plumber who ripped up a tile floor to replace a pipe. He installed new tile on top but warned the owners not to walk on it for 48 hours. He emphasized not to let their kids or their dogs walk on it either. They walked on it but alleged the defects were caused by improper install. We had an expert do a report which confirmed that it was consistent with proper installation but people walking on it too soon. Crazy homeowners still went to trial on it. In their evidence disclosure they included a series of pictures. One of the pictures had in the foreground a tile that was tilted upwards. The background very clearly showed a dog's paw pressing down on the other end of the tile. That wasn't so much an I got them situation as they got themselves. I had client whose $60,000 car was ruined by a shop that put in the wrong oil. We couldn't prove it at first. The engine blew up. Oil leaked out and evidence was lost. I subpoenaed their bank records. Figured out they bought their oil from Costco. Called Costco and got their prices for the last 2 years. I then worked out the amounts they were spending. Did some backhand math. And showed based on the values it was impossible they had ever bought the right oil. They settled in full immediately. Had a client accused of leading the cops on a high-speed chase. The cop on the stand estimated he was going 90 miles per hour. But never actually clocked him. Then the cop identified where the chase started with me. And where it ended. It lasted about 2 miles. Then we went through his log of when it started and when it ended. About 3.5 minutes. Once you walk through the math on that. The average speed of this chase was 35 miles per hour. Client got acquitted really quickly after that. I was suing a landlord who failed to make serious repairs in order to force the tenant out. The hard part is proving bad intent instead of mere idiocy, so you get higher damages. Code enforcement was involved. So I request those records. The landlord left a voicemail to the enforcement department saying to hold off on the fines. They will make the repairs as soon as the tenant is forced out. That was an easy case. I was representing mom in a bitter custody fight. Dad wanted full custody and argued mom was an unfit parent. Mom wanted full custody because dad had a history of domestic violence towards her and the kids. Dad's lawyer was doing a good job of painting her in a bad light during his cross-examination. And I was starting to get worried. His lawyer brought a close family friend as a character witness for dad, who said the usual nice things about dad. Then he said something about the moaning chickens. I thought that was odd, so I asked more questions. I was able to get the friend to spill the beans that the dad owned chickens for illegal big dig fighting. And he'd take his minor children to these big dig fights. And when the children were acting up, he'd punish them by forcing them to feed the chickens. During which they would get pecked and scratched by the chickens. And obviously, the children were terrified of those chickens. I could see the color draining from dad's lawyer's face. Mom got full custody. Someone told me this. The lawyer was describing the theft. The footprints make it seem as though he didn't go to the basement. And the defendant said, "Actually we did." I was deposing a guy in a large breach of contract fraud action. I asked him if he'd ever been convicted of a crime. He said no. Later in the dep I asked him the question again and there was no objection and he answered no. I then whipped out his indictment for felony fraud and his conviction for misdemeanor conspiracy, and he denied it was him until I started asking about his co-conspirator, his son, and then he gave me the "oh yeah, I remember something about that." My brother is an attorney. He had a case where the guy said he was permanently disabled from a work accident. At a deposition my brother overheard the guy talking about getting his house remodeled. He was already spending the money he thought he was getting. My brother drove by the house to see how much work was being done and saw the guy carrying bundles of roofing shingles up a ladder to the roof. This was before smartphones, so he drove to Best Buy and bought a video camera. Went back and recorded the guy. He had copies made and sent to the other attorney. The guy dropped the suit and was back at work the following Monday. My brother's client didn't want to pay for the video camera. He saved them thousands of dollars. They eventually paid, but he still gets a little peeved when he talks about it. The first case I ever did. Opposing counsel misplaced the copy of my client's driver's license. Rather than admitting his mistake and asking me to resend it, he filed a motion to compel, claiming we never sent it. Well, I was able to provide proof that we'd sent it to him like 8 months ago. So the judge was rather displeased with his antics. Not as exciting in the moment as some other ones here. But we hired a private investigator to track our defendant in a fraud asset recovery case. Private investigator returned with a photograph of torn pieces of paper that clearly constituted a ripped up note, albeit in a foreign language. I happened to know said foreign language, so pieced it together and realized it was a letter written by the defendant raging at his accomplice for making highly specific mistakes that ducked him over in the context of our fraud asset recovery case. Obviously. We later had this verified and sworn to via affidavit by an official translator. It was unbelievable. The handwriting was a match. Plus, he'd also signed it. And the contents were so specific. Contained information about specific amounts going into specific trusts under specific names, that it was basically a smoking gun. We almost thought they'd planted it to throw us off. But the guy was just stupid and arrogant. Ran into a bit of a fight-y admissibility, but the letter ultimately helped us receive a significant settlement that made our clients extremely happy. In a protective order hearing, a respondent admitted on cross that he choked his partner. His attorney looked like his head was going to explode. The judge still only granted an order not to abuse. He wouldn't grant the stay away or any other relief we asked for. Go figure. Plaintiff alleged he was so injured in an auto accident that he couldn't work, do any regular activities, or pick up his young kids. He then posted on his public FB profile him doing the ice bucket challenge. If you're not familiar, he basically lifted a huge cooler filled with ice water over his head. His attorney had no idea he had posted it. Not a lawyer. But when I was in the military I was accused of something I didn't do. And I had to go to court over it. And during court the prosecutor started to detail this investigation and how they had staked my apartment out for months. They entered into evidence a picture of my apartment. And when they put it up I looked shocked at my lawyer. BC, it wasn't a picture of my place. It was my ex-wife's apartment. A place I had never lived, never even spent a single night there. I lived in a house. She lived in an apartment. And when my lawyer was asked if she objected to the picture being entered into evidence, she replied, I don't mind them entering it into evidence as long as they change the listing of it. And when one of the members of the panel, no judge, 3-member board, asked what was wrong with the listing, she looked at him and said that's not his apartment. On top of this, the witness they used against me described going to my house on the night in question and she named the subdivision where she had visited me. Except that wasn't where I lived either, also wasn't where the picture they had was either. Case was dismissed and I was told they requested the witness to return to answer questions about perjury. I was involved in a patent dispute years ago that was basically large company going after small company. Not only did the judge decide we didn't infringe on the patents, but he then went on to invalidate the patents due to prior art we were able to show. Represented a DUI client who swore up and down to me he hadn't been drinking or doing any drugs. Newbie officer who had his field training officer with him in the car. Rookie pulls client over for attack violation. Walks back to the car with body camera still on. Training officer says get him out for a DUI and the rookie says but he's not intoxicated, to which the reply was do it anyway. Body cam clicks off. Turns on 7 minutes later and they're doing field sobriety exercises on my client. Client sat in custody for 3 weeks until I finally got the tape from the prosecutor and presented it to the judge. The O sheet looks from the prosecutor and FDO when the judge saw the tape. I'll treasure that one. Judge wrote the police chief a letter saying the FDO was dead to him and he'd deny every search warrant he tried to bring thereafter for being a liar. Client is hopefully still on track with his civil attorney in a lawsuit. My client's house burned down from an explosion in the fuel oil tank used to heat the house. It was clearly the oil maintenance company's fault. But his homeowner's insurance, from a very reputable company, still refused to pay out. citing a ridiculous technicality in his policy. Essentially, the policy covered damage caused by the oil heater, but they claimed that it was the storage tank that exploded and wasn't part of what was covered. So they deny his claim, which was about 1.2 million. And then I get involved. During a deposition with the claims adjuster, I ask how she came to the conclusion that the storage tank was not a part, or at least connected to, the heater. She states that she relied on her expert witness, who was an engineer. Little did she know I had already checked this person's background. He had zero engineering experience or education. As most of you might know, you don't get attorney's fees in most cases. However, when an insurance company denies your claim in bad faith, now you do. Her little admission cost the company about $500K in fees, on top of the original claim for 1.2 million. Plaintiff had an X-ray of an allegedly broken arm. It seemed off to me and the dates didn't make sense. I was in-house at an academic medical center. I looked at the case more closely and discovered the plaintiff was a X-ray tech at another hospital. After that, it was all over. My only full trial. Contractor ripping off my client, who was no saint. I went through entire contract where each sub was listed and he agreed to each line as being part of contract. He agreed that amount was to be paid to the subs. He agreed to the total. What he failed to do was list any profit. My last question was, where is your profit in this contract? No answer from him. As written, he was working for free. Case dismissed by judge without me having to present my side. I was trying to get a restraining order for a woman in DV court from her son's father. We are presenting testimony and she details a story where he grabbed her arm and slammed it on the tub, breaking her wrist. On cross, I asked the accused if he ever broke my client's wrist on purpose. His response, "Duck, yeah, I did." She was 9 months pregnant, about to smoke crack and wouldn't stop. I tried to grab her arm to get the pipe and protect my unborn son. Duck me. She left that detail out in her conversations with me. My client was a woman working at a meat packing plant. Her glove, they would only give her the loose kind because they were cheaper, got caught in the machine and she lost her arm. We sued the owners of the plant for the glove issue. We also sued the machine manufacturer for failing to include the required guard. Then we sued the distributor for being in the chain of the sale but didn't really think they played much of a role. The manufacturer swore they included a hand guard and said the plant owner must have used a grinder to take it off. During a deposition of the guy that owned the distraction company, he shows up with the sale documents he was supposed to have turned over weeks before. Turns out there was a note in small print at the bottom he didn't know about that said the sale was without the hand guard, which is against the law. I pointed it out and we ended up settling that afternoon with the distributor. The woman got all her medical bills paid, got money for a prosthetic and got a bunch of pain and suffering damages. Lady got into a minor fender bender with a truck in a casino parking lot. She backed out of a spot into him. My guy said she parked and went inside the casino for a few hours. At her deposition, she testified that she was so hurt she went right home and to hospital. I asked if she was a frequent visitor of casino, and if she had a rewards card. She was happy to tell me she did and she had gold status, and showed me the card. I subpoenaed her rewards card's records, and it showed she was playing slots 4 hours after the accident. When I was a prosecutor a long time ago, I was to charge some kid who had been accused of killing his father. It looked like a pretty open and shut case. There was lots of evidence against him. He was due for a death sentence. But then the jury came back with not guilty. I pulled one of them aside afterwards to see what the hell happened. Turned out one juror had changed the whole thing around, twisting all the evidence to point out every flaw in the case. The switchblade used as the murder weapon was a very common one. The witness was so old and feeble-sighted she probably couldn't see much. And the shorter defendant probably couldn't have pulled off the downward stab that held the man. Or just enough evidence to decide that there was reasonable doubt. Ducking juror rates took apart my whole case. My client was being sued in China. We decided to sue them in us to convince the Chinese judge to dismiss the case so it can be heard in the US. We filed suit. And we got the other side to accept service. During the Chinese court hearing, the opposition wanted to have the Chinese court hear the case. But Chinese lawyers got shut down because they signed for the service in the US, implying that the US court is the proper jurisdiction and venue. Edit. The opposing Chinese lawyers were fired the next day. Not a lawyer, but involved in fraud investigations. Called a suspect who was allegedly using the money he was being provided as guardian for an incapable individual. I explained the allegation. He stated, "Yeah, they're correct. I took the lump sum and bought coke and booze. I understand it was wrong. Do what you gotta so. I'll sign a statement or come in the office if you need me to. Not really dealing with high-level criminals here."